Be sure to check out my second channel called Rob Explains. There you can check out videos where I explain things outside of comic books. So the first video on mutants who exist beyond Omega level seemed pretty popular, and so what I want to do here is take another shot at this and talk about a mutant who's one half of the most common Franklin Richards debates among Marvel Comics fans. In this video, I want to have a discussion about Mad Jim Jaspers, as well as lay the question to rest: which one is stronger, Jim Jaspers or Franklin Richards? So Mad Jim Jaspers and the Crooked World actually comes out of Marvel's attempts to branch into the British audience with a line of comics titled Marvel UK. Centering on Captain Britain, a man named Brian Braddock and the brother of Psylocke, both of whom had lost their parents at a young age, as he was depicted in his initial appearance titled Captain Britain Weekly in 1976, Brian Braddock was a college student working at a research facility called Darkmoor Energy Research Center, which was attacked by a group called the Reavers, led by a man named Strag. Fleeing the scene in order to attain help for the scientists, during his escape, Brian fell into the Siege Perilous, which works as a dimensional doorway of sorts. Coming into contact with a man named Merlin and his daughter Roma, while we're not initially told who they are, they offer Brian Braddock the choice of choosing between the Sword of Might or the Amulet of Right. With Strag and the Reavers having followed him in order to close out any loose ends, Brian chooses the amulet and is endowed with the power of flight, force fields, super strength, and energy projection on a minor level, which allow him to go on to defeat Strag as well as the rest of the Reavers. Now in terms of Merlin and Roma, these two operate as part of the Marvel multiverse. Because these early stories saw Marvel fleshing out the concept of the multiverse, while stories like Days of Future Past would feature alternate realities, under Alan Davis, Alan Moore, and David Thorpe, Marvel UK was actually the first line to provide an expansion to the multiverse in Marvel Comics, all of which was introduced during the Crooked World story. As they were depicted, Merlin and Roma existed outside of the multiverse and served to ensure its continued existence by destroying foes that were deemed a danger to the multiverse itself. Now, where their purpose seems to run in direct contradiction with the Living Tribunal, in truth, I don't know the answer to this problem. The issue here is that Marvel never really reconciles the role of Merlin in relation to the Living Tribunal, except to say that both individuals simply serve as guardians of the multiverse. So picking up with Captain Britain along with his sidekick Jackdaw, an elf that had the power to teleport as well as influence the mind of others, the story saw the two thrown into an alternate reality called Earth 238 by Merlin, but for unknown reasons. During their initial foray into this reality, the two had come upon a group called the Crazy Gang in the midst of a robbery, and while Captain Britain and Jackdaw are easily able to overpower the gang, they end up coming face to face with Mad Jim Jaspers. Now initially, Jim Jaspers does not provide any display of his powers. Instead, he's largely depicted as the mastermind behind the Crazy Gang and their slew of robberies across Britain. However, the world around Captain Britain also seems extremely strange in that the citizens and the Crazy Gang all seem to be depicted in a manner similar to the story of Alice in Wonderland in terms of the various creatures and the physical appearances of people. This becomes especially apparent when Jim Jaspers asks his queen what should happen to Captain Britain, to which she replies that their head should be cut off. And so taking the fight to the street, Captain Britain and Jackdaw begin battling the forces of Jim Jaspers, at which point they simply retreat back to the helicopter in the shape of a teapot, which is being piloted by a dormouse. Now at the same time that this is happening, a woman named Saturnine leads a group called the Dimensional Development Court and stands as the Omniversal Magistrix. In her role, she oversees the evolution of realities and ensures that no one reality falls behind. Because 238 is considered primitive in that its people are selfish, the politicians are corrupt, and individuals with superpowers don't seem to exist, and because the progression of all other realities hinges on the fact that they all progress equally, the goal of Saturnine is to instigate something called the Push, which would adjust the minds of this world's occupants, bring them into a new age of enlightenment, in addition to activating superpowers among its various citizenry. However, the powers of Jim Jaspers come into fruition moments after the Push is initialized, when he starts warping reality. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that the Dimensional Development Court in Saturnine did not know what was going on with Jim Jaspers and did not know why all the individuals, the superheroes, and everyone had been wiped out from this reality. But getting back to our story, physically bending the world around him and driving its occupants insane, The initial reaction of Captain Britain is that Saturnine's push has somehow disrupted the fabric of reality and is destroying this universe. Furthermore, while Captain Britain deals with the fallout, he also encounters a being called the Fury. While we're not initially told how it came to be, the police of this world seem to control it and state that the Fury exists to wipe out superheroes. Sending it against Captain Britain, the Fury is able to easily overpower Brian Braddock by analyzing the nature of his powers and adapting to them immediately. Unable to cope with the situation and the fact that the world is seemingly falling apart at the seams, Saturnine gathers her personal guard and bails out, leaving Captain Britain and Earth-238 to its fate. Killing Jackdaw and turning on Captain Britain, the Fury begins a relentless assault that would seemingly kill Brian until Mad Jim Jaspers arrives in his teapot helicopter and rescues Captain Britain. However, rather than finding himself in a safe place, Brian Braddock falls further down the rabbit hole when he enters the helicopter to find that its interior violates all laws of physics and that the inside of the helicopter is larger than the helicopter itself. Furthermore, Jim Jaspers provides us with an explanation of what it was that happened to this world as well as what's happening now. As he explains, at some point along the line, he came to the realization that he could warp reality and in the process, ran for the position of Prime Minister on the platform of being anti-superhero. Now, why it was that he didn't simply will superheroes out of existence and make himself Prime Minister is never explained. But once he was elected to the position, because his propaganda had turned Britain against superheroes, he then created the Fury, which was designed to kill all of the superpowered people in the world, except for Jim Jaspers himself by virtue of its programming. All of which was done to ensure that Jim Jaspers was the only superhero in existence. Following this conversation, Brian Braddock comes to the realization that the room has expanded in size since the start of their conversation, and that various people now accompany the two, one of which includes the recently deceased Jackdaw. Unable to cope with the situation and losing his grip on reality, Captain Britain jumps out of the helicopter and lands at a graveyard dedicated to various superheroes from Britain, including the wildly powerful Miracle Man. After being tracked down by the Fury, the battle between the two is short-lived as Captain Britain seems to give up, lashes out at Merlin for sending him to this desolate reality, after which he's completely annihilated by the Fury. And so picking up with Merlin and Roma, the story transitions to their actions after acquiring what was left of Captain Britain on Earth-238. Using their technology, the two were able to completely rebuild Captain Britain's physical body as well as restore his memories and his mind. Arriving back on Earth-616, from the mind of Captain Britain, his experience was simply that he arrived on an alternate reality, was killed by the Fury, and woke up on Earth-616 with no knowledge of the actions of Merlin or Roma. Instead, shortly after his arrival, a group called the Special Executive, which served as a multi-dimensional bounty hunter group, which had been tasked by the Dimensional Development Court to retrieve Brian Braddock, meets with him. Now, as we're told, following the events of Earth-238, because the push coincided with Mad Jim Jaspers warping that reality, the belief of the Dimensional Development Court is that Saturnine had made a mistake, something which was compounded on after she had simply fled. Stripping her of her title of Magistrix and holding her prisoner, Captain Britain was summoned in order to stand at her trial and offer testimony regarding what had taken place. Introducing numerical designations for the first time in Marvel Comics, Marvel establishes that Captain Britain is only one member of the Captain Britain Corps, a multi-dimensional group that safeguards their own realities from various threats, with the Captain Britain of Earth-238 fleeing that reality when the Fury first began killing superheroes. In addition to this, because the Jaspers warp has effectively left the entire Earth-238 continuity in shambles, Saturnine's replacement, a being named Mandragon, eliminates the Earth-238 reality entirely, which destroys that version of Mad Jim Jaspers along with everyone in it. However, as we discover, in the Earth-616 continuity is another version of Jim Jaspers who, like his 238 counterpart, is implementing a campaign to wipe out all of the superhumans in the world, including the Hulk, Spider-Man, and others. Furthermore, because the Fury has the power to adapt to anything, it was somehow able to adapt to the destruction of Earth-238, and because Captain Britain was transported to the Earth-616 continuity, the Fury developed the ability to teleport interdimensionally. Now, where we don't actually get an explanation of how this happened, I would surmise that this was most likely for the sake of the story rather than anything else. But regardless, taking the fight directly to Jim Jaspers himself rather than falling into something that he doesn't understand, like the conflict in the Earth-238 universe, Captain Britain travels to the office of the Prime Minister in London, where Mad Jim Jaspers resides. But once he enters the room, he finds the massive form of Jim Jaspers in a space that is impossibly large, indicating that this version of Jim Jaspers is far more powerful than his Earth-238 counterpart. Now, what happens next is probably one of the most insane displays of reality warping that I've ever seen in a comic, and is one of the reasons why I love Jim Jaspers' character so much. Initially, Captain Britain is led to believe that all of this is a dream when he seems to wake up and is met with Saturnine and Jackdaw, who try to convince Brian Braddock that none of this had happened. However, he suddenly jolts awake in a hospital bed with his sister Psylocke at his side after seeming to have come out of a coma. With the doctors arriving and celebrating the fact that he's awake, Captain Britain goes on to explain his dream, only to learn that all of this was an example of Jim Jaspers using his powers to warp reality. And so what this does is essentially point to the fact that in truth, Captain Britain is woefully outmatched against a being of such incredible power, but also confirms that where Jim Jaspers in the Earth 238 universe was still learning to control his powers, the version of Earth 616 has total control over what he can achieve. And so, becoming fed up with his battle with Captain Britain as well as the slow-going process of eliminating superheroes, Mad Jim Jaspers simply wipes all of reality clean and begins with the task of starting the Earth 616 universe all over again. However, after recreating the Crazy Gang, the group is suddenly met with the arrival of the Fury. Because the cyborg hails from the Earth 238 reality and can adapt to anything, Jim Jaspers is intrigued due to the fact that the Fury was not affected when Jim Jaspers wiped everything out. Approaching the Fury, the cyborg realizes that while it was programmed not to kill Jim Jaspers in the Earth 238 continuity, this version is a different Jim Jaspers and that its programming does not apply. Attacking Jaspers by disintegrating his body, the two begin to engage in a literal battle that sees Jaspers reshaping reality around them into forms that boggle the mind, but with the Fury adapting to every single attack. Eventually, however, the Fury comes to realize a crucial fact. In the realm of the Earth 616 universe, or any universe for that matter, Jaspers is king and can control anything and everything. However, there is one place where Jaspers is completely powerless, and that place is the Earth 238 continuity. Because that reality was destroyed and exists as a void in space and time, the Fury realizes that without a reality to manipulate, Jaspers is powerless. Now, to sidetrack here for a second, as far as the comics have depicted, this is the single difference that separates Franklin Richards and Mad Jim Jaspers. Where Franklin Richards can create the clay needed to mold something, Jim Jaspers needs the clay to mold, meaning that Jim Jaspers cannot create something out of nothing, while Franklin Richards can, which makes Franklin Richards a far more powerful character. And so without a reality to manipulate, the Fury is able to overpower Jim Jaspers, and by virtue of this, able to destroy his brain entirely, killing him in the process. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion on Mad Jim Jaspers. It was a long time coming, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.